So it's coming up to Christmas. A lot of people are going to be cooking a four-rib, a standing rib roast, a prime rib, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to show you how I like to prepare and smoke one of those. And to do that, I'm going to need a prime rib, or a four rib, or a standing rib roast, or a rib of beef. But very quickly, before we get started, in the UK, we don't really use the term prime rib. You'll typically see it sold as a four rib, or a standing rib of beef, or a beef rib roast. So just know I might use all of those different terms interchangeably, but the point still stands. This was cut somewhere between ribs 6 and 13, cut from the rib primal, which is why it's called prime rib, nothing to do with the grade. We just happen to call it something slightly different. So I'm gonna show you how I get this prepared. This is from Farmerson's. It was about £100 for this. It's 3.28 kilos. But if you don't want to spend that kind of money, you could always pop to somewhere like your local Tesco's. They're currently doing a bone-in rib of beef, and this only cost me £42, 2.8 kilos. So if you're in the UK and you want to do a standing rib of beef, and maybe your butcher isn't that great, you could pick something like this up in the supermarket. So there are so many different ways you can prepare this cut. And the obvious one is whether you go bone in or bone out. Also, this has got a little bit of extra meat on top of it as well. Quite often you'll just see the eye and then the rib cap, but we've got some extra meat up top here. I'm gonna leave it on. But yeah, in terms of preparation, there are loads of ways in which you can prepare this. And the big question often is, do you keep the bones on or take the bones off? For me personally, I'm gonna take the ribs off, but you can do what you want. You could take the ribs off, you could leave them on. You could take the ribs off and then tie them back on. So the cons of taking it off is that it doesn't look as good, particularly if you French the bones, and that is to take the meat out between the bones. You have the bones sticking out. It looks really good. You also don't get the opportunity to eat all of this nice roasted rib meat between the bones, which is some of the best meat on this cut. And possibly you don't get the flavor from the bones, but arguably, I don't really know if you'd be able to tell that anyway. If you do leave them on, these bones are gonna have to come off at some point, and taking them off after it's cooked, it's kind of messy and tricky to do that. And when you do cut those bones off, you've got a load of unseasoned meat where those bones once sat. And I like to have as much bark and crust and surface area on this cut of meat as possible. And I really do like to make the gravy with these bones. So we are gonna take them off, but you do whatever you want. I am tempted to take this additional piece of meat off the top. Or do I leave it on? Maybe I'll leave it on. So we're gonna go in nice and close to these bones and just as close as we can. I think that's a good job. Haven't lost too much meat there. It's nice and flat, and these bones will make some great stock. The next thing I'm gonna do is tie this back up. And the reason for that is this cap here is likely to peel up. Once that fat starts to render in there, the meat shrinks up, this will pull up and it won't look great. So I'm gonna tie this back up. And then we've got some of the more questionable butcher's knots on YouTube. So the next thing we need to do is get as much flavor into this meat as possible. And I mean into the meat. This is a roast, so a lot of that meat is gonna be unseasoned if we don't do some kind of brining. We're gonna be doing that by doing a dry brine, a 2-day dry brine. Allow plenty of time for the salt to get into the meat. And to make sure we don't undersalt it, we are gonna weigh our rib of beef and work out what 1.5% of this weight is. So it's 2,762 grams, and 1.5% of that is
41.445.
about 42 grams. And you definitely don't have to go through this effort. This is really just to make sure that I don't under-season this in any way. If you brine it with the right amount of salt, you're definitely not gonna under-season it. Alternatively, just chuck some salt on it. So we are gonna get our 42 grams of salt onto this beef rib, and we wanna make sure that we use all of this because we've weighed it out specifically for this particular cut. And if we don't use all of the salt, then the weighing was pointless. And it's gonna look like a lot because we're not just seasoning the surface of this. Over the next 2 days, this salt is gonna penetrate deep into the muscle, and it should look pretty heavily salted. And if you can, try and focus more on the meat than the actual fat cap. That fat cap's not going to absorb the salt like the actual muscle will, so it will be pretty salty if you put too much on there. We want all of this salt getting into the muscle through the muscle itself. So that is pretty much all the salt used. This can go onto a wire rack and into the fridge for the next 2 days. And we should come back to some nice, well dry brined rib of beef with flavor all the way in the middle. So I put this in the fridge. So while that beef full rib is brining in the fridge for the next couple of days, we can get on and make our stock for our gravy. And we made the sacrifice of losing these ribs from the actual rib roast. So we're gonna make the best use of them by using them to make our stock. Break down these ribs into the individual bones. A couple of carrots, rough chop. A couple of sticks of celery, an onion, a bulb of garlic, which I'm just gonna cut this way, Then this is a good opportunity to use any kind of vegetables that are hanging around the kitchen, any aromatics, such as this shallot. I had one left. Get all this veg, take your rib bones and just lay them on top. And then you can put this on the barbecue if you want to get some live fire flavors going on. For me personally, we're going to get enough smoke flavor in the actual prime rib itself. And all I really want to do is get some mild reaction going on all of this stuff, get a nice roasty flavor. So this is going to go into an oven at around 180 degrees Celsius or 350 Fahrenheit for maybe 45 minutes. So about an hour later or so, these beef ribs have browned off nicely. We've got some nice color on the vegetables. Gonna bring in a stock pot and get all of this in there. All of the juices that formed at the bottom of the pan. And to that, we're gonna add some fresh unroasted celery. And we've got some herbs here. We've got some sage, thyme, rosemary, and again, any herbs that you've got lying around that don't look the best, throw them in. Cover this with water. Now this can go onto the hob for 6 hours, really at a minimum. You can push it to 12, you can push it even longer, but at some point, all of the stuff in here will have given off all the flavor and nutrients that it possibly can. So you start to get diminishing returns after a certain amount of time. So I found 6 hours is pretty good. Bring that up to a boil. Once it's at a boil, turn it down to a light simmer, let it go for 6 hours. 6 or so hours later, get a container, bigger container. Smells good. Let all of this stuff drain off for a little bit and you have yourself some nice beef bone broth. And definitely throw this stuff away. The whole point of this is to extract all the flavor, all the nutrients, everything that this stuff has to give has now transferred into the liquid. This stuff will and should be very tasteless. Bin it, compost it, whatever you want to do with it, but get rid of it. I'm going to transfer it into here actually for fridge storage space reasons. I'm not worried about it not being very clear. I'm not really going for appearance here, but if you wanted to ensure that it was clear, you could have a much less aggressive boil. So this will cool down, go into the fridge until we need it. So 2 days later, this rib of beef is fully brined. You can see that there's no longer any salt on the surface. The salt should have penetrated pretty deep into the muscles, so we should have seasoning all the way through. So at this point, you could just throw this on the barbecue or into the oven. It's got plenty of salt flavor, nice beef flavor, nice aged flavor, but I'm gonna apply a rub, and not a particularly complex rub. I want the beef to do all the heavy lifting when it comes to the flavor, the beef and the salt and the smoke. And the surface of this is a little bit too dry because it's been in the fridge uncovered for the last 2 days, and it's probably not going to accept the rub as well as I'd like. So I'm going to put a little bit of a binder on this, and you could go with water, oil, anything you want to make the rub stick. I'm going to show you what I use. Starting off with some oil, any oil will do, with the exception of anything that's going to burn too easily, maybe like olive oil, because we are going to sear this off. And then some balsamic vinegar. And these two things don't like to mix, but we're also going to add in some 0 salt beef stock cubes, and that's going to act like a bit of a binder. Just going to fortify those beef flavors. And if you're going to use a binder to help you rub stick, you may as well use something with a little bit of flavor in it. And now we're just going to break this up and pretty much make a paste. So once it's all broken down and blended up, you should have something that looks like this. I actually went overboard with the oil, so I took some of that oil out. You should have something that's kind of that texture or thicker. It doesn't really matter. We're just trying to get this rub to stick. Take some of our binder and just get it all over. Just get the surface nice and tacky, add a little bit of extra flavor in there. And that's pretty much it. You really don't need a lot. We're gonna go real simple and just hit this with some black pepper. Regular 16 mesh. Looking to get a nice bark on this, but nothing too crazy. That is looking good. I think that's gonna be a real nice piece of beef. So this is pretty much ready to go. It's been brined for 2 days. It's been seasoned with pepper. Now all we need to do is cook it. And if you're just watching this video for entertainment, great. But if you're watching this video to know how to cook this, just know that regardless of what you're cooking on, the principles are the same. So I thought about cooking it on the offset, the Weber, the Chud box, the Traeger, but I eventually settled on the PK. And the reason for that is we're effectively going to be reverse searing this. We're going to start off with a nice low, smoky, about 225 degree cook for a couple of hours until we reach an internal temperature of about 120, maybe a bit lower than that. And that's really going to set the flavor, the color, and hopefully a nice bit of a bark. And then we're gonna bump the temperatures up and subject this to a lot more heat to hopefully set a real nice dark crust on it. If you're cooking on a Kamado, a big green egg, just follow the same steps, same temperatures, and you'll be just fine. So with the PK, we're gonna get that set up, start rolling some oak smoke around 225 Fahrenheit, and we're gonna be monitoring the temperature with a Chef's Temp Pro Temp Plus probe. That just helps to let me know where we're at in the cook and ensure that I don't go over my target. So I'm gonna be monitoring that from my phone indoors whilst the PK just chugs along and cooks this nice, slow and smoky. Time to make some gravy with our beef bone stock. So I just warmed this up in the microwave. Super, super easy. We're going in first off with some rendered beef fat. Let that melt down. And once that's mostly cooked down, just go in and chuck in some plain flour. And we're gonna cook this out for about 5 to 10 minutes or so, just so it's not grainy and just so it doesn't taste like raw flour. And once that's cooked down for a little bit and got some color, we're gonna go in with some red wine. Followed up pretty quickly with our beef stock. Just gonna go in little by little at this point and just make sure I dissolve all of this flour into the stock. And now it's just a case of using as much of this stock as you'd like and then reducing it to the texture that you'd like. So we're gonna hit it with a little bit of salt up front, set this onto a medium heat and let it reduce down until it's at the consistency that we're happy with. So after about an hour of simmering and using all of that stock, we've reduced it down and concentrated it into a delicious, rich gravy. Threw in a little bit of balsamic vinegar at the end just to balance out the richness. This is delicious. It might look a little runnier than you like your gravy, but it is incredibly rich. The mouthfeel on it is ridiculous. It's thick, it's gelatinous, surprisingly beefy considering how little bones we used. So we'll set this to the side and we'll heat it up just before we need it. So we've got beef on the go, we've got our gravy. The only thing that's gonna make that better and the ultimate pairing is crispy roast potatoes, and I'm gonna show you how I make them. So I've just got some peeled potatoes here sitting in cold water, and this water is seasoned as if it was pasta water, a lot of salt. And the variety of potatoes that I'm using today are Nemo potatoes. Never used them before, but apparently they're great for roast potatoes. I usually use King Edward, and you can let these soak overnight or a couple of hours, and all we're gonna do is get them onto a burner, bring them up to a little bit of a boil, and take them out when the edges start to look like that. These are not even remotely cooked, but the edges have just started to fluff up. So we get these drained off. And once drained off, they can just sit here and steam. What we're looking for is this white crust to form around the outside. That's the stuff that's gonna go really crispy. So we don't need to keep these hot, these can cool down, we don't need to worry about it. All we're looking to do is get these super dry. And all of the steam coming off is showing exactly that happening. So leave these for however long you need to. Meanwhile, we're gonna get a tray, a big chunk of rendered beef fat, and we're gonna put this into an oven set to 392 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 Celsius and start to preheat this beef fat. This is what we're gonna cook our potatoes in. Into the oven it goes. So these have cooled down sufficiently. You can see that they're nice and white and dry on the edges. Pop a lid on, hold it, and then give it a really good fluff up and a shake. And that is gonna increase the surface area even more, and this is what you end up with. A really nice fluffy on the outside but not even remotely cooked on the inside roast potato or future roast potato. Extra fluffy, extra dry. These are ready to hit the preheated beef fat. So about 3.5 to 4 hours later, my chef's temp has let me know that this has reached an internal temperature of around 120 Fahrenheit, and I spot checked that with my Final Touch X10 and we're pretty good. We've got some good color on there, but we really want to get this seared up. Going to put on a few extra coals, make sure the vents are fully wide open. So I'm going to bring this inside for the next 10 minutes or so, just so it doesn't cool down too much out in this temperature. Meanwhile, we're going to get these red hot before we bring this back out. Back out a few minutes later, this is going back on. As I say, all the vents are open. We're gonna shut this down, let this rip. And the amount of time that I'm looking to sear that beef for is about the same amount of time that I'm gonna roast these potatoes for. So these can go in and you should be able to hear them crackle. I like to put them in by hand so oil doesn't splash absolutely everywhere. And if you can, give them all a bit of a basting with that fat. Make them extra crispy. Fluffy potatoes fried in rendered beef fat doesn't get much better, although I say that all the time. And the key is not to leave this out of the oven for too long. Into the oven this goes. About 45 minutes later, chef's temp's reading 130. I'm gonna take this off, bring it inside and let it climb up to about 135. So the beef is off and resting, probably gonna rest it for about 25 minutes, half an hour, something like that. The potatoes have probably got about 15 minutes left on them, and I'm just reheating my gravy just over here, and I hit it with a splash of balsamic vinegar just to brighten it up a little bit, give it a little bit of acidity, some more complexity, just to balance out all those rich flavors. Also, you can now buy Wilson's barbecue t-shirts in both black and navy, plenty of different sizes, international shipping, so it doesn't matter where you are, I'll ship to you. So check out the link below and pick one up. So I'm calling it on those roast potatoes. They're done, crispy, crunchy. Probably could have gone a little bit further, but I'm pretty hungry. Just gonna get them onto a wire rack, hit them with a little bit of fine table salt, just any cheap table salt will do. So we can set these off to the side and slice up our beef. And here it is. Kind of wishing now that I'd cut this additional cap off, but I think it's going to be delicious either way. It really is just a presentation thing, so it doesn't really matter too much. And this fat on top has rendered out real nice. And this will leak. It's been resting for like 25 minutes, maybe more. You know, that's the nature of prime rib. And cooking it to this temperature. Let's see how it looks. That is looking good. I'm not mad about that. Other than the presentation, this bit could have come off. Juicy, well cooked, nice and medium. See if we can take a slice of this. Big old fat chunk. Let's bring some crispy potatoes to the party. I need to bite into one of these. Oh, they're hot. Crunchy, fluffy. This honestly looks incredible. It smells incredible. These roast potatoes, I'm actually more excited about the potatoes than I am the prime rib. Real nicely cooked and incredibly tender. Smoky, pretty much seasoned the whole way through as well. Although, probably hit this open side with some fleur de sel salt. Cut that a little bit. Have a dip in this gravy first. Oh yeah. Honestly, I'm reluctant to pour the gravy over the top because it is so rich, so strong. So it kind of takes over everything. You don't really taste the beef that much. The crust or the bark on this is incredible, particularly the top part because it's just pure rendered fat. It's crispy, crunchy, genuinely incredible. And this gravy is so smooth. Glossy, super glossy. Little potato, piece of beef on top, some of that gravy. 2.5 days of work, more than worth it. And there is no possible way that you can cook turkey or goose, or to be honest, any other kind of meat that's gonna beat this. It doesn't exist. Those potatoes, super crispy, but super fluffy on the inside. So yeah, I would definitely give this a go. Follow all the steps if you're new to this or not really too confident in yourself, and you'll end up with a beautiful, perfectly cooked fore rib, prime rib, standing rib of beef. All the steps are the same no matter what you cook it on. So in these videos, I always try and think about what I would do differently next time. And honestly, the only thing I would do is just remove that additional cap. It's not really bringing much to the table, to be honest. It's still very, very good beef. It's just a little bit tougher. This gravy is just so glossy, so smooth, so rich. Well worth making a little batch of stock and reducing it down into a small but powerful little glaze. So I'm very much of the opinion that just because you smoke something doesn't instantly make it better, but this is without a doubt infinitely better by cooking it outside over some wood, over some charcoal. The beef, the agedness, the smoke, the salt, the pepper, everything just goes together really, really well. This is what I'll be doing for Christmas. I might add some herbs to the potatoes, but generally this is how I'm cooking beef and potatoes. So I hope at the very least you found this video entertaining, if not educational. And if you learned anything from this video, then please let me know. I'd really love to hear if you did. And if this inspires you to do something different this year, then again, let me know. So I'm gonna make a huge dent in these potatoes, probably another slice or two of this beef, drink this gravy. Please like, comment, subscribe, do all those things. It really, really does help me out. And I'll see you next week for another video.